I think they will be able to understand it. I mean, at the end of the day, the ones who are really making the decision are going to be the ministers, and the ambassadors. But I think it would be nice to have reports summarizing, the Starlight's findings from the database, and show that, for example, certain types of subsidies not only have negative welfare effects at the international level against other countries, but even has negative welfare effects domestically, that is hurting, the other industries, or even hurting, the other players in the same industries where the subsidies are targeting at when they do not receive the subsidies. So I think that would be really useful. Yeah. I think what you are seeing right now, in most of the countries, is basically a kind of a one-sided game, where all these rent seekers basically asking the government for subsidies, and then the government, will listen to them and provide subsidy to them. But with this new information coming out, I hope that they would be passed on, for example, to NGOs or to sectors or industries with a more kind of international perspective, that they will be able to dig into the information and figure out what are the true costs of all these subsidies. Because when all these rent seekers start to request for subsidies, all they are saying is that we need to save this industry, we need to save this factory, and the subsidy can achieve that. But the hidden cost was not shown. So I hope that this database can help to illustrate the hidden costs. The industries which are destroyed, for example, the downstream industries, or the other competing firms whose interests are destroyed because of the subsidies. And that would be really helpful to show to the policymakers, look, there's the other side of the story, right? And that hopefully can help them to change their perspective on negotiations. I would say probably more like a collective effort, because if you look at all these three major players, they are each sinners, but in different ways, right? I mean, if you look at US and EU, they are both very big on agriculture subsidies. And if you look at China, it is very big in terms of industrial subsidies, especially the subsidies to SOEs. So I hope that this study can illustrate, the hidden costs that they have to incur. Sometimes what you could see is that the policymakers themselves might be aware of such hidden costs, but because such information is not readily available to the general public, so the policymakers simply choose to ignore them. And by basically laying everything down, under the sun, make them available so that people can refer to them in the discussion. I think that is already a big step forward, in that we can work with more information than, whatever the information the government wants us to see. So that would ensure a more balanced policy debate, and hopefully that would lead to more advocacy, from other groups which are also affected by the subsidy policies, and therefore lead to some policy change. I think that is the hope. So I'm a lawyer, so if you look at it from a WTO law perspective, the WTO subsidies agreement basically divided subsidies into a few categories. You have the prohibited subsidies. The underlying rationale is that they are the worst form of subsidies. And then you have the actionable subsidies. The underlying rationale is that they are also bad subsidies, but not as bad as prohibited subsidies. I think what this new database could illustrate is whether or not these underlying rationales, these assumptions are true or not. And also another very important part of the subsidies agreement is these non-actionable subsidies, which used to exist, up until 2000, but then it expired. So what we could do is basically to look at, the subsidies to see whether there are indeed some subsidies which would have a overall, positive welfare effect on the economy as a whole. I think if there's such a consensus, then maybe this would also help to bring back non-actionable subsidies, which WTO members so far have not been able to agree on reinstating. I think this need to be a continuous process. I do not envisage this to be a kind of a one-off exercise, because I do understand, countries for various policy reasons might need to, introduce subsidies. For example, if you look at the current ongoing pandemic, that provide a very good reason for countries to introduce subsidies in order to save industries sectors which they regard as beneficial to the society. So I do see the value in that, but as I mentioned earlier, I mean the problem is that oftentimes the subsidies policies were introduced without sufficient debate, without sufficient data. We, as the general public, do not know why a specific sector is chosen, to be given subsidy, while the other sectors, which might look similar, are not chosen, and we do not know, how the subsidies were allocated. What are the effects of the subsidies? Whether the subsidies really achieve the purposes that they were set up for. So all these are interesting questions. I think, through this data, we would be given, the kind of information that we need to make more informed decision, both prior to introduction of a subsidy, and also after the introduction of a subsidy, as we do a kind of a post-mortem review, to see what really happens, whether subsidy worked, and how should we change the subsidies program to make it work better, and so on. So all this would provide invaluable information to the policymakers to help them to make better, more informed policy.